The quiet Hollywood mansion in Brentwood hid a nightmare no one could have imagined. Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were dead, but the shocking twist? DNA evidence now points to one of their own sons, while the FBI allegedly tried to bury the truth. What really happened that night inside the Reiner estate could rewrite everything you thought you knew about this family tragedy. December 14th, 2025 started like any other Sunday for the Reiners, or at least that's what the outside world believed. Rob Reiner, the Oscar-winning director, and Michelle Singer Reiner were at home in their sprawling Brentwood mansion, tucked behind tall white gates, their lives seemingly untouched by the chaos of Hollywood. But the moment a massage therapist arrived for her routine session, something was off. She knocked. No answer. She called Rob. No answer. Then she reached out to Romy Reiner, their 27-year-old daughter, who lived just a few blocks away. When Romy arrived, the air around the mansion was heavy, almost staged. She stepped in, expecting perhaps a missed appointment or a brief miscommunication, but what she saw froze her completely. Her father lay unresponsive. Her body reacted before her mind could even process the scene. She stumbled back, screaming, paralyzed by shock. And here's the first twist: the public didn't know Romy didn't call 911. It was her roommate, Alex Silberg, who sprang into action. His calm and decisive reaction would become central to understanding the events that followed. As forensic evidence began to surface in the weeks after, a shocking revelation emerged. Jake Reiner's DNA was found near the scene. Jake, who was reportedly out of town that night. Why was he there? And what could have driven him to be at the scene of his parents' deaths? Meanwhile, Romy would later learn that her mother, Michelle, was discovered elsewhere inside the mansion hours later. The scene had been disturbingly staged, meticulously cleaned in ways that investigators would later describe as almost unreal. The family friends told the press that Rob had warned people privately that he didn't feel safe around his own son. And whispers about a $200 million inheritance only made the story darker. But here's the thing the public never saw: this wasn't just about money. It was about fear, betrayal, and secrets that had been simmering in that mansion for years. And just when you think the pieces start to make sense, new forensic leaks surface, hinting that the real story had been deliberately buried. The events leading up to that fateful day reveal a family under pressure for years, one the public never truly understood. Late-night calls, welfare checks, and police visits to the Reiner estate weren't anomalies, they were warnings. Neighbors had reported shouting, crashes, and frantic movements inside, but each time, officers left with little to act on. For nearly a decade, the Reiner mansion had been a pressure cooker, a family holding together with a delicate facade while tension simmered beneath the surface. And yet, just months before the tragedy, the Reiners appeared on the red carpet together for the premiere of This Is Spinal Tap 2. Cameras flashed. Smiles glowed. Hollywood saw a perfect family. Behind closed doors, however, Rob and Michelle whispered fears of their own son, Nick. A ticking bomb, one they tried to manage, guide, and contain. That same Nick Reiner, present at the party, displayed unsettling behavior: blank stares, eerie questions like "Are you famous?" and a detachment so palpable it unnerved everyone around him. But as investigators would later piece together, Jake Reiner's DNA being discovered at the scene cast a new shadow over what was assumed. Was Nick's odd behavior a coincidence? Or was someone moving in the shadows while the FBI already had critical information they refused to reveal? And while Romy and Alex scrambled to make sense of the immediate horror inside the mansion, the deeper truth remained hidden. Every detail they noticed, every reaction they had, would become pivotal in uncovering the real timeline of that day. The FBI's delayed forensic reports, the missing early photographs, and the contradictory witness statements only fueled a growing suspicion something about the Reiners' deaths had been deliberately obscured. And in a family already fractured by fear, mistrust, and Hollywood pressures, the questions kept piling up: who really made it into the house first? Who touched what? And what secrets were deliberately kept from the public? As investigators dug deeper into the events that unfolded inside the Brentwood mansion, the story became far more disturbing than anyone outside the inner circle could have imagined. Romy Reiner's initial shock, paralyzing and visceral, was only the opening act in a nightmare that would stretch on for months. When she first stepped inside the house that Sunday afternoon, she encountered her father lying unresponsive on the floor. Her body froze, her breath caught in her chest, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. She stumbled backward, screaming in disbelief, as her mind tried and failed to reconcile the image before her with the father she knew, the man who had been her anchor her entire life. Yet, despite what tabloids later claimed, Romy did not make the 911 call herself. That task fell to her roommate and close collaborator, Alex Silberg, who had accompanied her to the house. His immediate, decisive action would become one of the most pivotal factors in the unfolding investigation, anchoring a timeline that no one, not even the FBI, could later dispute. The forensic evidence, however, would inject a shocking and entirely unexpected twist. Traces of Jake Reiner's DNA were discovered near the location where his father had been found, a revelation that completely contradicted the initial narrative that Jake was out of town that evening. Suddenly, questions that had been unthinkable only hours earlier became central to the investigation. Why would Jake be there? What had he been doing? And, perhaps most importantly, could his presence indicate something far darker than mere coincidence? The tension inside the mansion, investigators later revealed, was far from new. Friends and insiders told the press that the Reiners had long been living under a quiet but constant strain. Rumors of arguments, whispered warnings, and subtle threats had circulated for years, but the family maintained a carefully curated image of normalcy to the outside world. The mansion itself, with its pristine gardens, high gates, and gleaming white walls, was designed to project wealth, stability, and the kind of Hollywood glamour that obscures nearly everything underneath. Yet, according to multiple neighbors and official welfare checks spanning over a decade, that image was misleading. Between 2013 and 2024, police had responded to the estate multiple times, often for welfare checks or domestic disturbances. Each visit left the neighborhood with a quiet sense of unease, and each time, the family's public image remained intact, while the underlying tensions grew. Inside, these strains manifested in ways that were invisible to anyone outside the mansion walls. Nick pacing late at night, heated but hushed arguments, security personnel subtly monitoring areas of the home, and small domestic incidents that, when isolated, seemed minor but as a pattern, formed a troubling narrative. And now, months later, these patterns were viewed under a new, chilling light. Forensic evidence pointing to Jake Reiner suggested that the family's internal tensions may have been manipulated or at least misunderstood for years, creating a tragic scenario that may have been preventable, yet somehow slipped past even the most vigilant observers. Adding to the complexity of the situation was the role of the media and social perception. Early reports, fueled by speculation, misrepresented Romy's actions, falsely claiming she accused her brother Nick of involvement in the tragedy. Social media amplified these inaccuracies exponentially. Blogs, tabloids, and celebrity gossip pages twisted her grief into narratives of suspicion, while Romy herself remained in shock, processing the loss of both parents while facing an online storm that mischaracterized her every move. Official records, later obtained by investigative outlets, painted a very different picture. Romy did not accuse anyone, she simply provided facts about the household, including who was living there, the layout of the rooms, and what had occurred that day. Yet the damage had already been done. The world had spun her presence inside the mansion into a story of guilt, feeding a cycle of misinformation that threatened to derail the investigation entirely. Meanwhile, Alex Silberg's presence became critical. Not only did he call 911, but his testimony provided an indispensable timeline that investigators relied upon to piece together the sequence of events. He recounted in detail how Romy froze upon seeing her father, how she stumbled backward, how the sheer shock incapacitated her, and how he, Alex, took control, directing the emergency response and helping stabilize her until authorities arrived. In essence, Alex became the linchpin that allowed investigators to differentiate between human trauma and potential complicity. Without his calm and precise actions, Romy might have been mistakenly implicated, her grief misinterpreted, and critical evidence lost in the chaos. And yet, Even with these eyewitness accounts, the mystery deepened as forensic experts examined the scene. Jake Reiner's DNA, found near the location of his father, raised profound questions. Had he been at the mansion at all, contrary to prior claims? If so, why? And how had the FBI, according to leaked sources, quietly handled this evidence for weeks before it came to light? These revelations suggested deliberate obfuscation. The implication that the Bureau may have redirected attention, intentionally or not, away from Jake's potential involvement raised even more suspicion. How much did law enforcement know? How many critical details were withheld from the public? Each new revelation created a paradox. More information existed, yet the truth became even less accessible, leaving Romy, investigators, and the public alike navigating a maze of conflicting reports and hidden facts. This multi-layered scenario forced investigators to re-examine not only the immediate events of December 14, 2025, but the broader dynamics of the Reiner family itself. Years of private tensions, the documented instability of Nick, and Jake's mysterious DNA connection converged into a situation where motive, opportunity, and family history intertwined. Could long-standing fears and protective instincts have escalated into something unthinkable? Or was the tragedy a culmination of mismanaged perception and concealed evidence? The staged appearance of the mansion, the apparent cleanliness of the crime scene, and the absence of certain key items raised further alarms among law enforcement. Analysts questioned whether elements of the scene had been deliberately arranged to obscure what had really happened. Even beyond the forensic and psychological evidence, the emotional toll on Romy was profound. She faced an impossible dilemma mourning both parents, coping with media distortion, navigating public speculation about her brother Nick, and reconciling the emerging reality of Jake's forensic connection, all while processing trauma so severe it defies simple comprehension. Experts on trauma note that human responses in moments of intense stress often look irrational or inconsistent. Romy's freezing, her screaming, and her reliance on Alex were not manipulative or deceptive. They were instinctual reactions to a scene of extreme horror. Yet the narrative constructed by outsiders ignored these nuances, creating a public perception at odds with reality. At the heart of it all was a single haunting question: could the truth have been prevented, or had the web of fear, secrecy, and delay created an unavoidable tragedy? And as new insider reports continue to surface, revealing more about the FBI's choices and what evidence was quietly held back, the public is left grappling with an unsettling reality. The Reiner family tragedy is far from a story of isolated events. It is a layered narrative of loyalty, deception, fear, and shocking revelation, one in which every assumption, every relationship, and every piece of evidence must now be re-examined under an entirely new light. The night before the tragedy, the Reiner family had attended what seemed, at first glance, like a typical Hollywood event. The premiere of this is Spinal Tap 2 at the historic Egyptian theater. Cameras flashed, fans cheered, and the family appeared, as always, flawless in public. Rob, Michelle, Nick, Jake, and Romy stood shoulder to shoulder, their smiles dazzling under the bright lights. Yet insiders now reveal that the image presented to the public masked a fracture that had been silently growing for years. Behind those smiles, sleepless nights, whispered warnings, and quiet dread had already begun to consume the household. Rob and Michelle, though celebrated and revered in Hollywood, were deeply fearful for their family's safety. In private conversations with friends, they had repeatedly admitted, "I'm afraid of Nick," a phrase that at the time seemed overprotective or parental, but now resonates like a chilling premonition. The fear wasn't just about erratic behavior, it was a deep awareness that something inside their son had shifted, and they could no longer predict when the tension would snap. Nick Reiner's presence that night was far from casual. Though the event was glamorous, he was markedly different from the rest of the crowd. Witnesses recall his movements as eerie and detached. While everyone else mingled, laughing and exchanging pleasantries, Nick drifted through the theater in silence, his gray hoodie pulled low over his face, his eyes vacant and distant. Even those closest to him described him as gone, present in body but absent in mind. He avoided his parents' attempts at engagement, responded with short, robotic phrases, and moved through the room like a restless shadow. Observers reported moments of unsettling interaction. He would appear suddenly near strangers, ask a flat, disconcerting question, "Are you famous?" then vanish again, leaving a cold stillness in his wake. The energy in the room shifted subtly, but perceptibly what was meant to be a celebration slowly began to feel tense, heavy, as though an invisible pressure was pressing down on the family and everyone around them. This behavior, seemingly trivial at the time, takes on a darker significance in hindsight. With Jake Reiner's DNA later being tied to the crime scene, questions emerge about whether Nick's odd conduct that night was simply coincidence, or whether it was part of a more complex sequence of events that the FBI had already been aware of, but chose not to reveal publicly. According to insider reports, law enforcement had received early intelligence suggesting that certain members of the Reiner family might be connected to potential risk factors inside the mansion. But rather than alerting the public or even the rest of the family, this information was reportedly withheld, adding layers of uncertainty to what happened next. When the Reiners left the premiere that night, the facade of normalcy had returned outwardly, but the invisible tension that had been building for over a decade now pressed down like a storm about to break. Hours later, at Conan O'Brien's private holiday gathering, the unease escalated further. Rob and Michelle, in an attempt to keep Nick engaged and perhaps defuse tension at home, had personally requested that he attend, even though he hadn't been formally invited. The evening itself was lavish soft lighting, gentle jazz, champagne flowing, and conversations filled with the laughter of Hollywood insiders. Yet Nick's presence remained jarring. Guests later recounted how he wandered aimlessly, occasionally standing close to small groups, asking repetitive and flat questions that left the room silent. His detachment created an almost surreal atmosphere, a stark contrast to the holiday cheer surrounding him. At one point, he approached actor Bill Hader near the piano, asking, in that same monotone voice, "What's your full name? Are you famous?" before walking away without another word. Moments like this, though seemingly minor, underscore the fracture between the family's public persona and the internal chaos they were struggling to conceal. Rob Reiner, observing his son's increasingly disquieting behavior, finally attempted to intervene, shouting for Nick to stop pacing and sit down, his voice cutting sharply across the room. Michelle rushed to calm both men, but the tension was irreparable. The energy between father and son crackled with unspoken fear. Within minutes, the family quietly left the party, pale and silent under the Christmas lights, leaving the warmth and laughter behind. Witnesses later noted that even in this brief departure, there was something unmistakably ominous about the way they moved together, an almost premonitory heaviness that foreshadowed the events that would unfold just hours later. By dawn on December 15th, 2025, the world was already whispering about the Reiners. The glamorous Hollywood family, once untouchable in the public eye, had become the focal point of one of the most mysterious and unsettling cases in recent memory. With Jake's DNA connected to the scene and Nick's behavior scrutinized, questions began to multiply. Had the FBI, in quietly holding back critical information, unintentionally allowed this tension to escalate to a point of no return? Could the tragedy have been anticipated if evidence had been acted upon sooner? And what role, if any, did the quiet, simmering fractures within the family play in creating the circumstances that led to Rob and Michelle's deaths? Even now, months later, the answers remain elusive. Each new leak, each emerging detail, suggests that the Reiner family tragedy is far from fully understood. From Nick's peculiar conduct at public events to Jake's mysterious DNA presence, from the hidden FBI files to the whispers of long-standing family tension, the narrative continues to unravel, leaving the public and investigators alike grappling with a question that grows heavier with each revelation: what truly happened inside that Brentwood mansion, and who, if anyone, holds the answers that could finally bring closure? The Reiner family saga is far from a simple story of tragedy. It's a labyrinth of human emotion, hidden motives, and layers of secrecy that only now, with forensic revelations and insider leaks, begin to emerge. Rob and Michelle Reiner, celebrated in Hollywood for decades, curated an image of success, warmth, and family stability. But behind the gates of their Brentwood mansion, fear had quietly taken root. Repeated welfare checks, emergency visits, late-night disturbances, and whispers of growing tension were all early signals, a silent drumbeat of warning that no one outside the inner circle could interpret until it was far too late. The tragedy of December 14, 2025, didn't appear in isolation. It was the climax of years of unease, mismanaged mental health struggles, and escalating paranoia about family dynamics, inheritance, and trust. Romy Reiner's experience that day, walking into horror, paralyzed with shock, and relying entirely on Alex Silberg, illustrates the human element of trauma, how instinct, loyalty, and courage intersect in moments of unimaginable pressure. She wasn't calculating. She was surviving. And yet, the media, the public, and even parts of law enforcement twisted initial impressions into narratives of suspicion, obscuring the actual facts. Jake Reiner's DNA appearing near the scene changes everything. Suddenly, the story isn't just about a grieving daughter or an unstable son. It's about a hidden actor whose presence was previously denied, whose role may have been shielded from public scrutiny, and whose motives remain a haunting mystery. The FBI's delayed reports, vanished photographs, and selective attention to key witnesses suggest deliberate manipulation of veil over the truth that only intensifies the scandal. Even Nick's documented struggles and eerie behavior at a high-profile party take on new weight when juxtaposed with forensic evidence connecting Jake. Were these public tensions a red herring? Were the family's internal struggles exploited to obscure the real chain of events? And what about the inheritance? The $200 million Rob and Michelle had quietly begun reallocating. Were family loyalties tested against greed and desperation? Every answer seems to raise more questions. The Reiner mansion, once a sanctuary, is now a silent monument to a family fractured not by one event, but by decades of secrets, fear, and misjudgments. And as the investigation continues, insiders hint that the story may extend beyond what the public has been shown. Other witnesses, unexplored evidence, and hidden communications that could shift the narrative yet again. Hollywood's spotlight, so often a protector of image and fame, proves powerless in the face of intimate family tragedy, where human psychology, betrayal, and greed collide. As Romy Reiner navigates grief, loyalty, and shock, she becomes a lens through which we understand the fragility of family even in the richest, most powerful households. Her brother Nick, her friend Alex, and the shadowy implications surrounding Jake all intertwine into a saga that challenges assumptions about trust, innocence, and culpability. The Reiner case is more than a murder investigation. It is a cautionary tale about appearances versus reality, the quiet escalation of fear within family walls, and the lengths some might go to control narrative, perception, and truth. And as we watch the unfolding leaks, forensic reports, and insider testimonies, one question continues to haunt every observer: how much more remains hidden behind closed doors? The mansion's silence is deafening, the family's loss irreversible, and yet, the public is only seeing the surface of what may be one of the most complex, disturbing Hollywood scandals of recent years. The shadow of secrets, betrayal, and unanswered questions stretches far beyond the gates, reminding us that fame can never fully guard against the chaos of human nature. Subscribe for the latest updates as this story continues to unfold.